I don't have an option to start the live stream, I don't believe.
All right.
It is recording though.
All right, let me go out to YouTube. It's not giving me that option either, which is the city of Wildwood, and it's not. Let me try that one more time. Well, Rick, it's not being cooperative, so we're recording the cloud. Travis can roll this over to YouTube tomorrow, so we should be okay if you want to go forward.
All right, sounds good. Mr. Bader, you want to start us off?
Yes, sir. We'll get the meeting started. Board of Public Safety meeting Thursday, June 7th, 6:35. We'll get it started with a roll call.
Good evening, everyone. Marshal Jeff Bader.
Here.
Do we have board member Chris Preston on? I see that he's here. Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm present.
Hey,
Great. Board member Vince Loyal
Here.
and council member liaison Dave Bertolino.
Here.
All right, and also with us, Rick Brown, Director of Public Works, Steve Cross, City Administrator, Police Liaison, Captain James Mundell is here, and also we have sitting in for John Bradley, Rod Cook, the Deputy Chief Fire Marshal of Metro West, and I'm Michelle Scherer, the meeting recorder.
Thank you. Moving on to the approval of minutes from the April 7th, 2022 meeting. Everybody should have got a draft of those public safety minutes and had a chance to review them. Or anybody see any additions or corrections that need to be made to those? Do I hear a motion for approval on those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
I guess to be easier, anybody opposed? How's that? All right, those minutes have been passed. Looks like the next section on our agenda for tonight is public comment. Do we have any public comments out there?
I don't see anybody that would be wanting to make a comment, but if anyone's out there, if they would raise their hand, that would be certainly helpful. I don't see any indications.
All right. If we move on for information, we have no items. The old business, it looks like we have no items. I want to congratulate the board on finishing up those 3 items last time and sending them up to the Board of Aldermen with unanimous decision. New business, the proposed modification to the animal regulations, and the documents are attached to the agenda. So who gets to weigh in with that one?
Captain Mundell, would you be able to speak to this one?
Sure.
All right.
We discovered that the Wildwood Animal Code, and this pertains to basically pets, dogs, cats, and such. The Wildwood Code did not match the St. Louis County Department of Health Animal Code. So by having a separation there, what would be legal under Wildwood ordinance was actually in violation under county ordinance, and under county ordinance, the health code, a Wildwood resident could be cited for their dog running loose, which is where this kind of came about. If everyone has that document in front of them, section 3 under the Wildwood code allowed for you to have your dog off a leash within 50 feet of you, with the understanding that your dog would respond to your commands. The county code does not allow that. So as such, a person could be cited for a dog running loose under the county code. And apparently it happened within the last year, where a resident reported that, and we did not cite them under the city code. So the individual contacted the St. Louis County Animal Control, who did come out and cite that dog owner for having their dog running loose and not on a leash. So in order to match the two ordinances, suggestion would be made for that one section to be removed from the Wildwood Municipal Code in order to match the St. Louis County Code. And Rick, you want to comment further? I think Joe made a remark on that, or you had a remark on that.
Looks like Gabe said something, so.
Yeah, Mr. Brindley had a question. All I was going to state was we did talk to Joe Vunich, our Director of Parks and Planning, about this, and he concurred with the need to modify the Wildwood Code to match the county code. So we would add that for your information as well.
Mr. Barlino?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I guess, Captain Mandel, what you're saying is we can't enforce our ordinance. We have to change it to be in compliance with the county ordinance, so there really shouldn't be any discussion here. However, would someone take the responsibility to make sure that from a handicap and service dog approach, I don't know, the words aren't coming correctly here, but are we hampering anybody who has a disability who uses a service dog if we have the leash requirement? And it's probably been explored up to this point, but just to make sure before we just, change this, is there something else that we need to write into it that says the exception is if you have a, certified service dog, something of that nature? Is anybody else sensitive to that at all?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, and I think it's a good point. Vince, go ahead and weigh in here.
I'm just curious what historically, if we have any information regarding when this was initially adopted, what the rationale was by having the 50-foot range for free range, if you will. I hated to go to council and get knocked down based on a discussion that occurred, looks like 1997. Anyway, Rick, do you have any historical information that says how we got to this point?
To be quite frank, I really don't. I suppose we could try to do some research there. I don't know how successful we will be, but we could try to come up with some background on that if you'd like.
I'm not comfortable in voting on eliminating something that was previously adopted by the governing bodies without doing some research what their logic was with it.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may, in answer to Mr. Loyal, typically, not in all cases, but in most cases, our initial code, city code, was lifted right from the county. So we started with the county, and then we have modified that over the last 27 years. And some things, have changed, and we have aligned the city code with county, but the impetus was more than likely county code. And it sounds like, and I'm speculating here, but just kind of knowing how other things have occurred in this particular case, it sounds like, and we could do more research as Rick just said, but it sounds like the county then reevaluated their code and dropped this requirement. And so now what's being asked of this board is to consider the same thing, to drop the code. And by dropping the code, which is, Captain Mundell, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about dropping this language out of this. Is that correct?
Yeah, just to
So-
match the county ordinance, right?
So if that language goes away in its entirety, is really the issue about service animals really, that's moot at that point. Because there is no requirement to have an animal on a leash anymore if we remove that language under number 3. So there is no requirement about keeping an animal within a certain distance or anything like that. By removing that language, a person, being a service dog or otherwise, or any animal for that matter, is free to roam at will. Is that not, is Captain, is that what you're saying that the county is?
No.
No, the county requires them to be on a leash.
Right.
Okay, so they just took out it requires them to be on a leash, but they took out the 50-foot requirement.
Right.
I believe so, yeah. So the Wildwood ordinance allowed you to walk your dog without a leash, with the understanding that you could command your dog or cat, I guess, to come back to you or something to that effect. And I'm sure the reason is that under certain circumstances, an animal may disregard their owner's commands and, could be hit by a car, could, engage another animal, or someone walking their dog or a person walking on the street and such.
So the requirement is for an animal, a dog, cat, whatever, to remain on a leash, but that does, the 50-foot maximum is no longer consistent with county code. That
Right.
leash could be a retractable leash and could be 100 feet. And that would be okay per the county. And then as you're proposing here with the city as well.
Well, the county code requires that they're on a leash.
Right, but I'm just saying that they could be on a 100-foot leash. They just have to be on a leash.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So I want to throw something in here because this is why we have these discussions, because Mr. Bartolino brought up a good point about service dogs and Vince brought up a very good point about the historical perspective of that. So, Captain Mundell, do we know how this affects like dog training areas? So like, if you go out, and I don't know if there's any areas in Wildwood that do dog training, but if you go out off near the entire, Boy Scout ranch out there, there's a huge area out there where these dogs are running off the leash all the time training. So, there's 3 areas right there, I think, that we probably ought to explore a little bit. Service dogs, the historical perspective, and then how does this impact dogs that are in training? Because I'm assuming dog parks are covered because it's a fenced area.
Right. And I would think under a training situation, they would be in a confined area, whether it's, a fenced area or building or whatever. And looking at the dates on this, the Wildwood section has, a date of 1995 and a date of 1997. So I'm sure it's just a matter of this was overlooked. At some point the county updated their code, and Wildwood was not made aware of it or tracked it. And really, we weren't made aware of it until about a year ago or late last year when that situation happened. And basically the complaining party, found that loophole and was able to make something happen. So I'm not sure, like I said, when the county would have updated theirs.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, but in county parks, St. Louis County Park Rangers have jurisdiction. And in like Babbler Park, which is a state park, has jurisdiction. So, and what we don't want is somebody to step outside with their dog and think they're in compliance with the law and find out they're really not. Yes, sir, Mr. Bartolino.
Yeah, Jeff, what I would recommend at this point is our ordinance is in violation of the county code. Therefore, we cannot enforce it. That's number 1. And since this body cannot change ordinances, I think that this body, that the Public Works, needs to just simply elevate this issue to the council with a recommendation to review the ordinance and perhaps even hold a public hearing on it to see if we should change the ordinance, because we don't have that authority, but the council does. I think it would shortcut cut a lot of discussion if we just went right to the council with it and said, we're in violation. Here's, we're gonna kick it up to you to decide whether you want to change this ordinance or not.
So I agree with you, except do we really want to say we're in violation of county ordinance or just not in agreement with it? I agree with you that
They're different.
it's gonna be up to the board to decide whether they want to come into compliance or not. And I think you bring up some good points. There's a couple of sideline issues that need to be addressed. And, we don't have the authority to change the ordinance, but the Board of Aldermen does. So are we comfortable, forwarding this information to the Board of Aldermen with the recommendation that they address the or being in agreement with county council or county ordinance addressing the issue of service dogs? And then if there's any historical perspective there that we don't know about.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Berlino, I'd like to offer a suggestion, and that is before this goes to the council, there's a few pieces of information that still need to be researched. I would like for Mr. Brown and I to speak with the city attorney in terms of, the need to be in compliance with county code and just what that looks like. Again, I think we're not quite ready to go to council just yet. The mayor likes to have these things worked out at a committee level before we take something like this. So I think we have a couple questions, good questions that you all have raised. But I'd like to have the city attorney's opinion in terms of our code and the consistency are not with county code, if that's acceptable to this board.
I think I understand what you're saying. So do I hear a motion that we address some of the concerns brought up today and then table this for discussion at a future meeting, once some of those terms have been addressed? So I see Mr. Bartolino motion,
So
Royal seconded. Is anybody opposed to that? Looks like that motion carried. So Mr. Cross and Mr. Brown, you guys have, like I said, talk with the city attorney and just see if there's anything out there that we're missing on this. So
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, we will do that.
thank you. That's why we have these discussions. So, all right, moving on our agenda. Next item we have is any discussion regarding school safety.
Mr. Chair Bader, I wanted to really quickly mention, and Mr. Berlin raised his hand. This was on there primarily as a result of a request from Councilmember Bertolino. So I think that's the direction the department wanted to do, is turn it over to the council member.
We will give you the floor, Mr. Bartolino, to address this issue for us.
thank you, Mr. Marshall. In light of the last school shooting, the tragic situation in Texas, I talked to the mayor, to Captain Mandel and others, and my concern is the city in coordination with Rockwood School District doing absolutely everything that we can to prevent a tragedy like this happening in our school district in the future. We've been through this several times, and going back several years, we've had meetings with Rockwood and talked through them. But if there's anything that we've missed, anything that's evolved over the last few years in terms of addressing these kinds of situations, should the city be taking action? That was my only reason for putting it on here. And I didn't want a huge discussion tonight. I just wanted to kind of bring the subject up. And if others are in agreement that this should be discussed, then I would simply propose that at our next meeting, we ask City Administrator Cross to set up a discussion or an attendee from Rockwood. And Jim, hopefully you're back from your training session in Boston, and that we have again this discussion. Are we, again, the question, are we doing everything as a city and as a school district to protect our children and to prevent these tragedies from happening here? That was simply it, Mr. Bader.
And I think that's a good point, because it's like everything else, every other tragedy that occurs, people take steps, I think, to try to prevent them from happening again. But then over time, the sense is kind of dull and they kind of forget about it. I like the idea of maybe inviting somebody from Rockwood School District simply to the next Public Safety Committee to discuss with us what their plans are, whether it's ongoing training or whether it's the investment in new training. We're not going to be critical of what they're doing, but I agree with you that if we just simply keep it at the forefront of people's minds, they will do more to make sure that proper preparations are taking place. Keep in mind that all the 4E training or run, hide, fight, or whatever that occurred in the Rockwood School District at the last go around, most of those kids have graduated and gone on to college.
Yeah.
And a whole new round of teachers is in there. So I think it's a valid topic for discussion. I think, just if we give Rockwood heads up and invite them to the meeting, just to kind of discuss the steps they're taking, it keeps it, at the attention phase instead of becoming something that we forget about because it hasn't happened in a while.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Berlino, if I may, I can offer some information and a suggestion. This is a very, very good discussion, and clearly it's a very topical discussion. It is a discussion that the captain and I have had most recently, and that I had just as recent as last Friday with Councilman Mark Harder about this very subject. And actually, I had initially considered asking you all if Mr. Harder could attend tonight's meeting, but upon reflection, I thought it might be a little premature. But two things. Number one, I'm more than happy to reach out to the head of security at the Rockwood School District. Captain Mundell knows this gentleman. And I think and in fact, the captain could actually maybe be better if he were to invite him. But we can certainly do that. The head of security, who's very much involved in this. I mentioned Mr. Harder, and we were talking about other matters on Friday, but he brought up an initiative that he's working on. And he's been working on this for several years with another member of the St. Louis County Police Force. And what that is related to school shootings and church shootings. It's not an initiative to how to prevent them. That's very, very important. But the thrust of his initiative, and he's gone fairly down the road. And Chief Cook may in fact be aware of this, because what it is color coding, if you will, the schools, the hallways, and the whole impetus is to allow first responders to, from the outside, maybe perhaps glean a better understanding of where, if there's an active shooter situation, where that shooter may be in the building. Anybody who's been in Rockwood School or has been in Eureka High School of late realizes that is one gigantic maze. And so it's very difficult right now to explain to a first responder on the outside what hallway, what room, what floor that active shooter may be. Councilman Harder's initiative is to identify those hallways by a striping, green stripe. Okay, and having the rooms identified not only from the inside and have a clear logical sequencing of those room numbers, but also have those room numbers identified on the outside of the building, such that it can be communicated to first responders that potentially an active shooter is in second floor, green hallway, room 2022, something like that. And from the outside, those first responders would be able to know where they are. So that is an initiative that's ongoing right now. And if this board feels like they would like to get more information about that, in addition to having the head of the director of security for Rockwood School District come and speak before this board, Mr. Harder, and the person he is working with at St. Louis County Police, if it's the desire of this board, we can invite them here to discuss that particular initiative as well. And I believe that Chief Cook, you're probably aware of that, because I know they're approaching, I think there's, and I may have this number wrong, Chief, but something like 24 different fire districts throughout the county. And so they're starting with the parkways and some of the larger ones. And I think Rockwood would be one of the early ones, perhaps, that they're reaching out to get buy-in to make this, an initiative that ultimately the schools would need to follow at their cost to do that sort of thing. So I just wanted to share that information with you, because it came up just less than a week ago.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with the color coding on that. The basic idea is that if somebody's in green hallway or green building or whatever, any door you go in on the school, you follow the green stripe along the baseboard of the floor, and it will take you to that room. So you might pass through orange, red, blue, and purple to get there, but as long as you're following that stripe, you'll find that room. I heard what you said, and it's a great idea, but it's kind of an unfunded initiative, and that's a huge expense to be dumping on the schools. So, and I'm not the one that's going to say that should happen. Mr. Loyal, looks like you got
Well, and I think our emphasis shouldn't be on the response component, because I think we have professionals that address that every day, but on the prevention, if you will, and not only in the public schools, but we have a number of private institutions within the city that may not have the resources that Rockwood does, but if we can glean their expertise and then somehow share it, because if we have an event within the city, if it's not in the public school system, we're still going to, I think, have a responsibility to evaluate that event and see what could have been done. But I'd rather do that on the front end of it than certainly on the back end. So I don't think we should spend a lot of time on the response component. There's pros that are looking at that, but I'm just confirming that the prevention and make sure there's not burdens to that through our codes and ordinances or whatever, to make sure we can, the private schools should have the same safety component as the public schools.
well, and I think that, credit to Mr. Barlino for bringing this up to the forefront. I think, for my opinion, a good game plan would be to invite Rockwood in just to kind of talk about what they do already, because, they're a progressive school district. I'm sure they've got something, that they monitor on a regular basis. And then if, Mr. Harder at some point wants to come in and talk about this initiative, that's, I'm not opposed to it. I think he's a good guy and he has the best interests at heart. But, I think at this point, we bring in Rockwood just simply as a friendly, and Captain Mundell, I would make sure, and I know that you're a professional at that, this is an invitation for them just to update us on what they do. It's not going to be a critical discussion about, it's like Mr. Loyal just said, they're the experts. The people in charge of security at Rockwood School District know more about what they need than we do. And the police and fire that are responding know more than we do. But I think if we invite them in for just the discussion, it keeps that attention focused on a matter that is, critically important. So is everybody comfortable? Can I hear a motion on inviting Rockwood School District in just to discuss their safety plan regarding action?
First,
All right.
does that need to be in a closed session? I'll defer to Rick or Steve, or do we want them showing all their cards, if you will, in a public setting?
I think we would pose that question to the Director of Security and let him make that call. If he's going to be divulging secrets that are not known to the public, then absolutely it would be in a closed session. So I guess when we make the invitation and talk about what we want him to talk about, we'll find out if he's comfortable in a public setting like this or in a closed session. We'll find that out.
Thank you.
It's a good point to bring up. And he might say, I can do it both, because the one thing they don't have to disclose in an open session is, tactics and protocol. So,
Yeah.
All right, so do we have a motion on that?
Yeah.
Mr. Loyal, got a second? Mr. Bertolino, anybody opposed to inviting Rockwood in just for discussion? Nobody's opposed, motion carries. Mr. Cross, Mr. Brown, I'll leave it up to you to work it out with the Rockwood security director on whether it should be open or closed.
Will do, sir.
Moving on to our next item of business, let's see, that is Taylor Road speeding traffic conditions. So what do we have there? I'm going to assume Captain Mundell is going to lead on that.
I'm gonna punt it to Rick Brown.
Well, the captain really wants to take it.
All right, Mr. Brown, take it away.
I'll do my best. Thank you very much, Mr. Marshall. This next item, well, frankly, we do tend to send a fair amount of these speeding requests to the board for consideration. This one that's coming to you tonight came through Council Member McCutcheon, quite frankly. There's a resident who lives on Taylor Road who has expressed concerns with regard to traffic speeds on that road. And I'm talking about Taylor Road, which used to be known as Atherton Road, the section between Route 109 and Manchester Road. That's That section of road was improved in part when Brightleaf, the villages of Brightleaf was constructed a few years ago. So this resident lives closer to the north end of that segment of road near Sandalwood Creek. In fact, the resident is really the only home that fronts or has a driveway on that section of Taylor Road. The rest of the homes that are in that area have driveways off the side streets. So this is the sole person who lives technically on Taylor Road. So given its design and construction, the department would really consider Taylor Road to serve more as a collector road, not a residential local road. So the purpose of the road is to funnel traffic from the homes in the subdivision to the other streets, the higher order streets, Route 100 to the south, Route 109 to the north. And so for that purpose, it would typically carry a slightly higher speed or higher speed limit. So I did want to make that point. However, I would say near the resident's home, it is an older, unimproved section, closer to 18 feet in width, although there is a sidewalk on the one side for pedestrians. Through the villages of Brightleaf, it is improved. It's a new road. It does have a sidewalk, lighting, curb and gutter. And I would mention that the Wildwood Greenway runs kind of along the south side of Taylor Road through the villages of Brightleaf. So we have at least 3 crosswalks that cross Taylor Road and connect to the Wildwood Greenway, the shared use path. So there is that component as well with residents crossing the road at those crosswalk locations. Taylor Road does have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. And by and large, that speed limit was adopted because the original Etherton Road speed limit was 25 miles an hour. When we built Brightleaf, we essentially took that 25-mile-an-hour speed limit and posted it on the signs when we built the new section of road. So we never really did a formal speed limit survey or study to come up with what we felt really should be the speed limit. It was 25 miles an hour by default, quite frankly. So I wanted to make that point. The Wildwood Precinct, and Captain can certainly speak to this more directly than I can, have responded to the resident and have been on site and performing some radar and at least one speed survey in the vicinity of the resident, another one in close proximity. So we do have some data relative to the traffic speeds on Taylor Road and at the resident's home. It's at that location specifically. The volume of traffic on Taylor based on those speed surveys that have been completed is just over 1,000 vehicles a day. So from the perspective of a collector road, it is probably on the light side. We have collector roads in Wildwood that range upwards of 7,000 cars a day. Most are probably in the 2,000 vehicle a day range, so slightly higher. And certainly if you're looking at a residential or local street, we usually use 1,000 vehicles a day. It's kind of the yardstick to say, and once you get past that volume on a residential street, people start to complain and they feel like it's a higher volume of traffic than they would like on a residential street. So I wanted to put it in that context as well. I referenced the Wildwood Precinct's response previously. I did provide you my memo if you had time to look at it. The 2 speed surveys that were completed previously by the Wildwood Precinct and the traffic officers. They have a radar box unit that they install in the field for usually 7 days, Wednesday to Wednesday. And it's mounted on a pole or a light pole or a sign pole or something of that nature. And it does record traffic speeds for that period of time. And that's how we come up with these speeds. And typically we look at the 85th percentile speed, and we also like to look at the 50th percentile speed to see where that falls relative to the speed limit. And as I've said before to the board, traffic engineers usually key on that 85th percentile speed when we set speed limits. And we like to set the speed limit just below that 85th percentile speed. So in the 2 speed surveys that we took, the 85th percentile was at 33 and 34. I think I got it correct. 33 was the speed near the resident's house. 34 was the one at Rising Sun, which is to the south and east of the resident's location. So from a traffic engineering perspective, we'd probably say that, quite frankly, that 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, absent other factors such as a crash history or other things, is probably too low, frankly. And if we were to do it from scratch, we'd probably recommend a speed limit of 30 miles an hour, closer to that 85th percentile speed, quite frankly. So getting to the recommendation, I do have a recommendation coming out of this, unless you'd like to talk more about the enforcement activities, but the recommendation really is to consider this road for a keep kids alive, drive 25-mile-an-hour speed zone. We've done this on a number of streets in that area, quite frankly. If you drive over into West Glen Farms, and Mr. Bertolino can talk to this as well, we've implemented these speed zones on a number of streets. We try to do it where we have public property, schools, public parks in vicinity of the road. And I guess from my perspective, looking at it, we do have the Wildwood Greenway in close proximity with the crosswalks over Taylor Road. So when you factor that into the equation, I think the best suggestion I have would be to implement the 25 miles per hour, keep kids alive speed zone, put up the special signs that go with that zone, try to drive more awareness to that speed limit to drivers on the road, in particular in the vicinity of that resident's home. And this would be in place for the entire segment between 109 and Route 100. We modify all the signs accordingly and go with that speed zone. And that plus continued enforcement by the Wildwood precinct are what we're recommending at this time. So I think I'll end with that and open it for any questions that you may have, or if Captain wants to join or provide any additional insights, this would be a good time.
Well, I'll start it off by saying, I just want to make sure I understand this. We're talking about keeping the speed limit at 25, but putting up special signage.
That's correct. That is the recommendation, is to go to the 25-mile-an-hour, keep kids alive special enforcement zone, which includes the signs.
Mr. Bertolino?
Yeah, I would like to move that we do this parochially. That's in my ward. And it's there, just so you know, on that Taylor Road, there are at least, there's one roundabout and there's at least two, maybe three fairly good sized speed bumps. So we're not, the 25 mile an hour is not going to be excessive in terms of the traffic flow there. Now, from the point of Sandalwood Creek coming back east on Taylor Road, there is a stretch there which there are no speed bumps or roundabouts, so the 25 is certainly very appropriate there. So I would move that we adopt the recommendation from the department.
I have a second. Looks like Mr. Lloyd either has a question or a second. Which is it, sir?
A second.
All right. Is there anybody wants any additional commentary on this? All those in favor say, I'm sorry, Mr. Cross, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask a question of the captain, and he may choose not to answer the question in this particular setting. And if so, I understand, but I would like an answer to it. And if we want to do it in my office tomorrow, that's fine. Well, you're off tomorrow. So in 3 weeks, assuming that
I'll
you
get
come
back
back.
with you in a month, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. When someone is pulled over in one of these special zones, the Keep Kids Alive zone, it's in Mr. Brown's email, and as we've talked before on Thunderhead Canyon, where we've done the same thing, where the fines are doubled or more. When your officers write the ticket, is it noted then that it is in a special district? And then when it goes to court, do we know if in fact we are enforcing the doubling or more of fines? Do you have anything to add about that, Captain?
I don't know what happens when it goes to court. Obviously, that's up to the prosecutor to make those recommendations, be approved by the judge. I don't believe we make a note on it, but it would be in the definition of the location, I believe. Rick, correct me on that. Those locations are all spelled out as special enforcement, zones, or where those special circumstances apply to that.
So, okay, all right. So help me understand, and maybe it's a question maybe for our court clerk, but if you aren't making a notation on the ticket, and that ticket is the documentation, then that goes to the court clerk, and that violation then gets on the docket. How do we know, the city of Wildwood, that is you know, that we should be collecting double the fines or whatever the prosecutor decides. And I'm not sure I followed how that might happen, if it happens.
So I think there's two things. One, underneath the, you know, the Keep Kids Alive Drive 25, there should probably, in my opinion, just be the little secondary sign that fines doubled, you know? Because if I can, and Captain Mundell, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's simply a matter of whatever the speed limit fine would be in that area, because of the nature of the ordinance, if passed by the Board of Aldermen, would then be doubled when it got to the court. So, and it's going to be a totally separate ordinance from, you know, right now, the ordinance that covers that street probably says you got to drive 25 miles an hour. If the Board of Aldermen passes an additional ordinance for that special zone, anybody charged under that zone, the penalty for it would specify that the fines are doubled.
And I understand that. I'm still unclear. And again, maybe I don't want to take up very time. You were just getting ready to vote, but maybe that's something that we take offline, because I'm not clear. And I haven't been clear, even when we implemented this fairly recently on Thunderhead Canyon. It was a question I had in my mind, how this translates then into actual collection of doubling of the fines or whatever. But maybe that's getting too far down in the weeds for this board. And I could talk to Rick, the court clerk, the captain, and others to find out if we actually are collecting, you know, through the courts. And I don't expect the captain to know that. I just wondered if it was noted on the ticket that it was in one of those special zones, like the KKAD 25 zone. And so that the court clerk and ultimately the prosecuting attorney realized that should double. So I'm there's a break in my understanding about how that occurs, but I'll pursue that offline.
Mr. Boyle?
I think that's a very good point. I don't want to, as a participant in this body, you know, indicate we're going to put signage up that doesn't mean anything. I'd be interested in knowing the enforcement of those special zones, how that works out. If it does work out at all, that would have a big component for me as far as whether I support any of those in the future.
Okay, well, if it's okay with the board, I'd like to do some investigation and do a little legwork on that and report back at the August meeting, if that's all right.
I think you bring up a good point, and I think, you know, Mr. Loyal supports that point. At some point in the future, somebody could ask the question, so you did this, how effective was it? You know, and I think some of the concerns that you brought up, Mr. Cross, addressed that. There should be a tracking mechanism somewhere to be able to say what the impact of that increased signage was.
Yes.
Yeah, Marshall Bader, in lieu of that, I will withdraw my motion at this point.
All right, so we're going to agree to table this until the next meeting and come back with some of these concerns addressed on how do we track the effectiveness or the how the fines are imposed. All right, your motion to table it for more information. Mr. Royal, has that a second?
Mhm.
Do I have a second? All right, Mr. Preston seconds it. And then I assume nobody's opposed. If you are, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, so come back on the next meeting. We'll have an answer to some of those questions. Jimmy, you should be back from Boston by then. So.
I would think for a quick answer with the court, you check with the court clerk.
Right.
It's my understanding that, you know, when they log those in, that location, you know, to the court is triggered that those fines would apply. So, but she can answer that.
Okay.
All right, let's see, we have no items that are not ready for action. Are there any other items during an open forum here that anybody wishes to discuss?
I got one
Yes.
further regarding the animal control code. In the county ordinance, it does specify, you know, what you guys had questions about, that it does not apply to law enforcement canines, animals trained to assist impaired persons while they are accompanying the impaired person, or while being used for hunting field trips and dog shows while on land set aside for such purposes. So that exception is in the county ordinance. So if the city ordinance mirrors that, then that would be covered.
All right,
I move to adjourn.
I have a quick question. I think we have at least 3 items that we're continuing to the next meeting. So is it likely we will have a meeting in August, Rick? I mean, because we haven't,
It's more likely than not, I think now, yes.
Mhm.
All right, so we will have an August meeting and we have a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second? All right, we have the second by Mr. Loyal. So all those in favor?
I,
Aye. Anyone opposed to adjournment? No one's opposed. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Jim, have a good time in Boston.
Don't come back.
Yeah.
Don't come back a Red Sox fan, so.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you all.